Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. And thank you for joining us for the Changemaker Playbook with Henry DeCio. My name is Colin Mahan, and I'm a program manager at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. For those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit dedicated to enabling entrepreneurs from all over the world to realize their maximum potentials and grow. As you may have just seen in the chat, the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center, along with our partner Mentor Cloud, launched a free mentor matching platform for entrepreneurs called Mentor Makers. Create your own advisory board to guide and inspire you with in-the-moment mentorship from topic experts and professionals dedicated to providing exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So find or become a mentor today by using the link in the chat. Mentorship matters to all entrepreneurs, as we know. Their success is dependent on it. Quick housekeeping item, we're gonna open up for live Q&A at the end of the event, so please submit your questions for our speaker and us at the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation. None of what we do here could be possible without all the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, Bank of the West, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, BPM, and NZTE. We are humbled by their contributions. Now, during these still unique times, we're curious on how sentiment is among the entrepreneurs that we work with. So we're going to like to start by taking a poll to let us know how you're feeling about your business right now. So I'm going to launch that. First one, how you're feeling? Pretty straightforward. How are you doing? 2021 has started off on an optimistic hype. And the second question is, what's keeping you up at night? Your response to that question helps us understand what real-time, in-the-moment responsive programming we should be providing to you, the entrepreneurs in our community. So appreciate you guys voting on these. I'm going to give it another couple of seconds. So I'm going to jump into this discussion today, but appreciate you guys voting. And I'm going to end this and share those results. So looks like optimism's at the top of the key, but totally understand that surviving and anxious are sentiment that you guys are feeling. So hopefully today will help you increase that optimism meter. And finance seems to be keeping most of you up at night. Sales, marketing, scale, and team also on the board. So without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our special guest, Henry DeCio, author of the Changemaker Playbook, the new physics of leadership in a world of explosive change. Henry, welcome.
Hi, Colin.
Happy to have you. I'm going to jump right in. As our community said, explosive change is definitely something that we could describe 2020 to be.
Absolutely.
But Henry, your journey is truly unique. Can you discuss what drew you to entrepreneurship initially and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me on your program, Colin, and my greetings to everyone listening right now. I think my career path has been a series of bets that I've made on myself. Some of them work, some of them don't, but ultimately in the larger scheme of things, I think they do. And there's two thoughts come to mind as you ask that question. One is, I didn't realize this until very recently, but I take a sabbatical about every 7 years for about 6 months. Now, it's never planned, it's never financed, so that's always a challenging moment. But I found that my first sort of sabbatical happened when I was a junior in high school. I went to Sweden. I grew up in a small town in California, very, very rural, about 2,000 people. So going from a small mountain village to a small fishing village was an eye opener for me. And I think when I take these sabbaticals, I usually develop new skills. I have new experiences. I reset my leadership. That's one piece of the equation. The other part of the equation is My life has not been it's been sort of swervy. I wouldn't say it's been the career path has been very straight. And I remember as a kid seeing the White House on my television screen, growing up where the cable kind of stopped at our doorstep. It was 3 channels, and you'd see this thing called the White House come on every night. But 15 years into my career, I always had this sense I was going to work there someday. I don't know why or what that was. It wasn't an aspiration as much as it was just like a feeling. But 15 years into my career, I wasn't headed at all in that direction. I was a community labor organizer in Oklahoma at this point. So, but again, big moments in my life were resetting my leadership, going after my passion. I think when I get an idea, I just can't rest. And that somehow pulls me into new directions. And so a series of new, very different directions, I think has been the way I would describe my path to this moment.
Amazing. And in your book, you have coined the term the Changemaker effect to describe the world of explosive change we live in. When did you when did you come upon this notion of the Changemaker effect? And where were you in your career at that point?
Right. So I don't know if I had a name for it yet, but certainly it came into focus for me during my years with the Obama first with the Obama campaign, and then working as a deputy assistant to the president in the White House after that. The Obama campaign headquarters were kind of a laboratory for me. It was this place where I learned about leadership. I understood leadership. I was the 2008 campaign chief operating officer. So managing the day-to-day of this organization that grew from a mom and pop shop in the earliest days and scaled into like something akin to Walmart in a period of 21 months. So there's a lot of lessons on leadership in that laboratory for me. And the Changemaker effect was the result of a shift in the campaign where we grew up siloed and hierarchical. He announces, and then 6 weeks later, without a team, 6 weeks later, we're opening up the headquarters, took over the 11th floor of a Chicago downtown high-rise. And so you've got computers coming out of boxes, but we don't have our servers up yet. We've got checks coming in the mail. We're still scrambling to get the bank accounts open that would receive them. We've got phone calls coming into the reception desk staffed by volunteers. They don't know where to send those calls because we don't know each other's names yet. And the departmental rosters are changing even hourly. And so you grow up, you build the airplane in mid-flight, and someone gets the wheels, someone gets the fuselage, someone gets the cockpit. You basically build it one silo at a time. And so we grew up traditionally siloed and hierarchical. That's how we caught up with the crush of demand on this candidate in our campaign. But then, the pace and the speed of change is moving faster than that siloed one leader at a time system can keep up with. So think about it this way. So you have your morning meeting, the silo leaders, that's the department heads. And we come back to our silos. You're trying to keep work out and keep morale up. And those two things are directly connected. And then you have the silos getting harder because it's a permission-based system. So, Henry, can I open an office? Henry, can I get some money for some spending? Henry, can I hire some staff? So all of the department leaders are dealing with that pull downward and inward. And so that as the organization is moving faster and faster, the campaign calendar gets faster and faster. All those things combine to say we had to open up the organization and allow everyone to step into their bigness and into their leadership. And the one very big lesson from that, I know there's a long wind up here, but let me just tell you the real lesson from that shift from siloed, hierarchical, one leader at a time to everyone leading in every moment was this. Change gets faster, it's more explosive. And the reason for that is if everything you change changes everything, and everyone is doing it, then you're in an explosively changing system. It's no longer a system of repetition. It is a system where everyone is a change maker, and the physics of leadership are polar opposites. So for me, that was the big takeaway. And that's what I ultimately came to coin the Changemaker effect, to describe the new nature of change in this in this everyone leading in every moment environment.
Amazing. And I love your description. I've heard it said from other entrepreneurs of building the plane while flying it. But an entrepreneur I spoke to recently said it's like building a plane while flying it while being chased by sharks.
Fair enough. I think that's right. I mean, it really is a frenetic environment that you come into when you're starting a campaign. But you see this also in in real life emergency response situations. But more and more, our world is getting to where we're all sort of having to navigate this explosively changing world by working very differently and working in a dynamic, fluid state.
Amazing. Speaking of working differently, in your everyone a leader approach, it may seem a little chaotic when you give a lot of power to various levels of the organization. So how do you keep people moving in the same direction?
Yeah, so I mean, it is interesting. So the reality is that the way we're used to working is siloed, hierarchical, take direction, and sort of stay in your lane. As we moved into this new way of working, what I found is that everything changed about how we worked. For one thing, if you think about it, everyone had to step into their bigness. No one could be passive. And that's very different from the one leader at a time, one person big in every moment, everyone else small. Everybody stepping into your bigness is a mindset shift for starters. The second thing is that innovation was not this kind of function of technology. I think a lot of people would say about the Obama campaign from back in 2008 that we were innovative for our use of social media and for our technological supremacy, but actually it was the ability for people to tear down walls. When you have that agency, the ability to tear down walls and bring two or more sides together around any problem or opportunity, that is when innovation happens. Now, sometimes technology contributes to tearing down walls. So for us, we had probably the first real internet community around a campaign. So bringing people together through technology was certainly present in those conditions. But also technology could be a function of a team coming together. Now we would say you need an app for that, right? So that kind of engagement happening all the time, how do you hold that together? What I found is that when people are empowered and enabled and working in that agency, empathy becomes critical. The ability to use your changemaker capacities responsibly and in the norms of the community. And for the good of all. And so what happened was we shifted from a permission-based system to an empathy-based leadership and ethics environment where everyone had to use their capacities responsibly and for the good of the overall mission. And when you have that, when everyone is a leader, everyone is a stakeholder. And when everyone is a stakeholder, everyone is a steward. So we were able to hold the organization together all the way from the very earliest days to the very end, even as we scaled to unimaginable kind of proportions as an organization.
That's amazing. And after you make this shift, in terms of your own management, did you find your leadership style changed to these new dynamics?
Absolutely. So that's such a good question because what happens is the old manager is evaluated by the subordinates based on how well you keep work out, how well you keep morale up, how decisive you are. Right? 20/20 vision. Point the way and get everyone else to follow. That's the old game leader. And that's the one we grew up with. It's the one we learn about in our history books and in school. Somebody has to be in charge in any moment and that person is the leader. But, that old manager actually, as we moved into this new way of working, that old manager didn't work so well. That voice of expertise didn't go over very well, or authority didn't go over very well with all of the change makers around you. And so what happened is if you could not shift to more of a storytelling style, if you couldn't shift to more of a collaborative way of working, more of a coaching voice, then you found that your leadership would really not hold up with the other change makers in this system. So I found, for example, that in the early days, I was like the coach. I mean, I was like the quarterback, in the football field. You get the ball and you give it to the next person or you throw it down, but you're in every single play. In this new way of working, I was more like the coach on the sidelines, close enough to the field of play to be able to help people navigate the field, the activities on the field. But I was reliant on everyone else to lead. And so in that way, it changed everything about how I worked with my team, how I managed. Going from quarterback to coach changes your whole style, almost everything about your management.
I love that. And then you let the players on the field play their best games.
Absolutely. And it works. I mean, that's the thing, is when people, the challenge today, one of the big discoveries for me, Colin, was coming out of the campaign, is that there's this new DNA, this new agency in society. And it's something we tapped in. It's not a political thing. It's not Republican or Democrat or red or blue or any of that stuff. It's just what is. And that is a new way of thinking about ourselves: innovative mind, service heart, entrepreneurial spirit, collaborative outlook. We're change makers now. That's the whole thing. And it is very difficult to park your change maker at the door and go into that siloed hierarchical system where you're being told what to do, moment by moment all day long. We've got to recognize that we're living our lives as change makers, and we can't just stop that at the door of the schoolroom or the workplace. That's
such an interesting perspective. And I don't want to get ahead of myself, but the candidate that you are representing did win. So it would signal that some of these approaches are effective. So speaking of the book, Changemaker Playbook, you suggest that we're in an everyone a changemaker world, and that it's uniquely different than the world of the past. You're clear that this is a historic moment for the society to shift. So what do you mean by that? And also, how did you experience this working with Obama in the White House that opened your eyes to this change?
Yeah, it was actually when I left the White House, funny enough. So I had been really compelled by these new physics, this new way of working, going from the old 1 liter at a time, take your skill inside, your specialized skill inside 4 walls for life, into the silo way of working, into this new everyone leading in every moment system that is that was the reality of my laboratory. But then what I realized when I came out of the White House and out of the the sort of the almost 2 years in the campaign hothouse, and then another about 2.5 years in the White House bubble, and it is a bubble. So I came out into this world after almost 5 years away, and I had fresh eyes and a rested spirit. And I looked around, and this new lens on leadership, and I looked around and I realized that the world had made the same transition that I had in my little laboratory, that we had moved from this 1 liter at a time world, siloed, hierarchical, bring your skill inside 4 walls for life, to this world where we're all imagining, we're all innovating, we're co-creating. It looked more like my Obama 2.0 than 1.0. And I felt like I was the only one who saw it, even though we were all living in it. And one of the very key things I realized was that we had, certainly at that point, and it's growing today, we have rising individual agency. We have the tools at our fingertips that were once available to a few. So, in this little device here that I carry with me all day long, I have my printing press. I have my, I'm a content creator. I'm a broadcaster to my own network. I can be a first responder in a moment. And so when you see that, and then we have the democratization of leadership in society, silos are falling. And so when you see now this pivot from the 1 liter at a time world to now this new explosively changing world, where everyone is a change maker, we're in an everyone a change maker game. Now what you have is a new nature of change. Change is no longer linear and faster. Repeat that skill. Remember the craft of Ben Franklin and the assembly line of Henry Ford, the madmen of the 50s who helped to squeeze every last bit of efficiency out of repetition. Now we're in a world of change making, and the physics of leadership are polar opposites. And can I take you through that difference, Colin? Would it be?
I would love to. Yeah.
So I just wrote this down as we were coming. Keep this on paper, because it's hard for me to remember this. But think about this: in the old game, 1 liter at a time, In the new game, everyone leading in every moment. In the old game, one person big, everyone else small in any moment. In the new game, everyone has to step into their bigness. No one can be passive. In the old game, teams arranged by functional skills. In the new game, fluid, open, teams of teams coming together around problems and opportunities. So in the old game, for every problem, a department. In the new game, for every problem, a team. You have, in the old game, information on a need-to-know basis. In the new game, everyone has to have the information, full transparency. The tools have to enable everyone to see the big picture and act. Because again, no one can be passive. Permission-based, trust-based. If you look, exclusive, inclusive, if you look at the physics of leadership, they're polar opposite. And that was my big discovery coming out of my laboratory and my White House bubble. We live in this new world where the old playbook, this new game where the old playbook won't work.
It's so interesting. And I totally agree. Things are definitely changing from the old game to the new game, especially with some of the startups that are growing so quickly. They have to have limited time and bandwidth.
Yeah, so how do you see that playing out with your community?
Yeah, I think with information more available than ever, and the breakthroughs in leadership that have shown that DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion, are really important and also help make money, that a lot of people are adopting that. But there still are some players who have the old ways of thinking, as you had mentioned. Mm-hmm. But with young up-and-coming leaders like you all in the community, we are confident that there will be a big change in the coming years.
Yeah, and can I build on that? I think you hit on a really important point. The old game was a game about, sort of like minds kind of going after, whatever the mission was. Now we live in a world where change is happening so fast that you need all perspectives coming forward. So the requisite new leadership skill for this new game is the ability to tear down walls and bring two or more sides together around a problem or opportunity, because that's when innovation happens. And the team has to be able to it's not a defined team. So you have to be able to exit players and bring on different players as the nature of those changes come into view. So this is a very different kind of leadership game than we've ever seen before.
Totally. And I love that you call your campaign, your campaign laboratory. And you had mentioned that empathy was critical for leaders and teams among your organization. So obviously empathy is big for entrepreneurship to understand their users. So what's the significance of empathy for all of us in 2021 and beyond from your perspective?
Yeah, look, it's such a weird thing, because one of the flips, right? If the physics of leadership have flipped, one of the things now is that the soft skills are the new hard skills. Empathy was considered a soft skill, but in this new game, and we see the companies intuiting this. So you'll see the advertisements that we want workers who are empathetic. We want them to be problem solvers. But there is something real that's happening that requires us to see this change. The old game was about having a skill and having just enough empathy to get along with your coworkers in that defined silo. Now we live in a world that change is happening so fast that rule makers can't keep up with the pace of change. And I knew this again from my laboratory. We scaled from about 2,000 workers. It took us 16 months to get to 2,000 workers. In the last 16 weeks, we went to 6,000. And so that's a growth of 4,000. We went from about $40 million a month in the first 16 months to about 100 million in the last 16 weeks. So that kind of explosive change, I saw it firsthand. How do you keep an organization together when you have all these change makers coming into an everyone a leader system? And empathy was at the heart of it. If we could help people understand how we got business done, and then we understood that empathy could be the foundational skill, the foundation for how we lived and worked together. He would say in the earliest days, build it from the bottom up, respect everyone, no drama. All of this was about leadership, everyone leading, and empathy, responsibility, and respecting others. And so in this world now, as we go from this one leader at a time world to everyone leading in every moment, empathy is foundational. because rule makers can't keep up. Our institutions were built for repetition, so it really is on us. And then it's a highly interactive system. So you're going to have to master empathy at a very young age, and you have to have it as a foundation for how you guide your organizations, whether that's in your community or at work or in school. That is the new way forward.
Totally. And obviously it worked in your campaign, but why do you feel that now is the time for an everyone leads society versus the old one leader at a time of model?
Yeah, but the thing was, look, I didn't we didn't have a staff meeting and say, we got to go do this now. We were kind of pulled into this, with our market demands. Things were changing fast. We were going to have to be adaptive as an organization. So yeah, so there wasn't like a staff meeting where we said, okay, let's try this now. This is a lot of this is through experience and looking back on that experience. But there is no choice for us here in the world. We are now, this isn't like this is a better model or a better flavor of leadership. We are in a world now where change is outpacing, problems are outpacing solutions. Change is explosive. We have this new DNA. It is a reality. It is not an aspiration. Innovative mind, service heart, entrepreneurial spirit, collaborative outlook. That's our reality. I can go into a boardroom. I can go into a community auditorium of 200 people. I can go into a second grade class, and I've done it, and said, hold up your hands if you're this. Innovative mind, service heart, entrepreneurial spirit, collaborative outlook, bang, everybody's there. So now, how do you build a world to accommodate that agency and that ability to work, with so much empowerment around us? And that means that we have to have new systems, new mindsets, new ways of working going forward.
Couldn't agree with you more. So the world has obviously changed in many ways thanks to 2020. So what does that mean for us? Hasn't change always been with us?
Well, so look, what does it mean for us? It means that everything we do at our communities, in our communities, at home, at school, at work, has to change to meet this new imperative. Now, again, I've given you sort of the idea of Ben Franklin and the world of repetition that we've had for generations, and the playbook for that game. We're carrying that forward into a world where the game is completely changed. And if you play the new game with the old playbook, you will lose. If you play the new game with your old team, you will lose. So your old mindset, think about it this way, Colin. So imagine a football player. He's getting ready to go out onto the field to join the other players. So this is an American football player. So he's got the heavy gear and, the thickly padded helmet. He charges out of the locker room, through that tunnel, breaks through that tunnel, that light on the other end of the tunnel, and, the familiar sounds, music, dancing, the hum of the fans. He's prepared his whole life for this moment. And he sees the other players and he tracks that direction. And then you see him slow. The two steel spires on each end of the field are down, and there's two nets up instead. And the players don't have the same heavy gear that he has. They have, flowing hair and the light clothing to support their nimble movements. And they chase after a very different football. This one spins, skips low across the ground and spins out a black and white pattern. So the game is changed. There's three things he can do. One is he can stand frozen, doesn't know what to do. He'll be pushed aside. The other is he might double down on what he's trained to do. And that would mean tackling those unsuspecting players with the flowing hair and the light clothing to the ground. And that makes him dangerous and worrisome. And again, he'll be on the sidelines. Or he can get into this new game. Take off the heavy gear, take off that helmet, work new muscles, train very differently, bring new players on that know how to play, bring your own players along differently to play in this new game. You need a new playbook because the old playbook won't work. You need to know the new rules. You need to know how to score differently. All I'm saying is to get in, this is the reality. The new game is everyone a Changemaker world. You've got to be a Changemaker to play. You're going to have to get rid of that old playbook, those old mindsets, all the ways we've been thinking about things to get into this new game. And that is going to take courage and a lot of a learning mentality for everyone.
And change is hard. I think
change is hard.
But I think if you empower people around you, that's sort of one of the takeaways is that it's easier if everyone is involved in it.
Right. And that's right. And if everyone, and that is a very important point, Colin, because my football player can see the new game, but we don't see it. So we don't know this shift from one leader at a time, linear, faster change to everyone leading in every moment, everyone a change maker, explosively omnidirectional change. And so the first thing is, how do you get into this new game? You got to see it. And then once you see it, we can crowdsource into it, to your point. But that is hard, because that's why I spend a lot of time in the book. I spend 4 chapters in the book talking about the new nature of change so that we can see it, get in touch with it, and then I'm very confident that we have the capacities and the abilities to play in this new game. The first walls that have to come down are in our minds.
Amazing. And speaking of confidence, many of our entrepreneurs struggle with confidence. Imposter syndrome is a real thing. So what are some of your secrets to playing confidently in the new Everyone a Changemaker game?
Well, entrepreneurs, I talk about this too in Changemaker Playbook, because entrepreneurs are often striking new ground. They're often making that bet on themselves when others won't. Even if people really just love you to death, they're sometimes going to be confused about what's going on with you. So it's a hard place to be in. And the other thing is that there's a natural force in the world that defines us into our smallest selves. There's just a natural framing into our smallest selves. Sometimes we get framed, defined by our job titles or our responsibilities. And then if we're doing something really unique and we can't explain it, then we sort of get defined as sort of out there. And I know all about that. I talk through those things. But one of the things I've found about world-leading change makers that I worked with over particularly the last 7 years, and these are stories that I think any entrepreneur will find inspiring, anyone will find inspiring, is that they have the ability, leading highly effective change makers, define themselves before they get defined. And so it's about understanding your authentic way of seeing and being and what you bring into any moment. I had struggled through school. I was an excellent student, but I was always fighting reading comprehension. Didn't really understand why. I was a pretty good reader, but I couldn't hang with it. What I realized over time is that I had a pretty good dose of ADD, attention deficit disorder, and until I really understood that was my superpower, like I actually brought a very different perspective because of that. My ability to think differently, my ability to see differently in a situation, what I brought, my ability to bring that into a room and moderate that against other people. So I wasn't, I felt like I could integrate very easily, but I had a very different way of seeing and thinking. And in the world of repetition, that wasn't a good thing to be or to have. In this new world where everybody can contribute positively, I bring something really powerful to any situation. So I would just say to your entrepreneurs, get over it now. Start, defining yourself into your bigness and bring that into your moment and be confident and make those bets on yourself and know that, they don't always work out exactly the way you think, but they always work out exactly the way they should.
That's awesome. That's awesome advice. So on the other side, for larger organizations, what does this new reality mean for the leaders of those organizations?
Well, that's a good question, because you're focusing now on the organization and not the change maker. And I like that, because a lot of times we spend a lot of time trying to define what a change maker is and am I one of those and all of this. The reality is, I think we're there. There's a clear shift that way. But one of the challenges for organizations is how do you accommodate change makers? So what I often tell people is that the first thing that you have to look at inside of your systems, wherever this is, but in your organization, particularly in this example, know that all of your, or most of your ways of thinking, working, evaluating each other, through human development, different things like that, talent development, all those are rooted in the one leader at a time way of thinking. And so all your meetings are about, one person talking and everyone else listening and all those kinds of, right? All of those things, we're moving away from those more and more. But the real key for any organization now is to see change makers. If you're a manager or leader in an organization, you need to see change makers. And I'm not even just talking about your staff. I'm talking about everyone you're interacting with. And so if you're a teacher, and so how would you build it differently if you saw change makers? Imagine this: if you're a teacher and you saw change makers coming into your classroom and not students, how would you build it differently? If you're a civic leader and you see change makers in your community and not taxpayers, how would you build it differently? If you're a CEO and you see change makers coming through your doors and not customers, how would you build it differently? And then if you see change makers in your workforce, how would you build that differently? So the new KPI in this world where change is happening fast, for organizations, when you see businesses are failing faster, startups are failing faster, when we have big brands going away with all the sort of incumbency that goes with it, the brand recognition, the name ID, the money and the assets, and your place in the sort of business hierarchy, we see brands just completely going away. And so the new KPI in this world of explosive change, the new key performance indicator is how many of our people are change makers. That has to be the new KPI in our schools, in our classrooms, in our communities, in our businesses, for any nation. How many of our people are change makers?
I love that. And I mean, as you mentioned something about the customers coming in through the door, through some of the early companies that we're working with, right? Many of the early adopters of new technologies are change makers. So I totally agree with you there. It's people wanting to change the way that you work to either save time, money, to stay out of jail. Compliance is a big one for those security people out there.
Right. It's a whole new landscape. And I think, Colin, you raise another point, which is, how do we make sure we see a generation that's coming up that we think is clearly wired for change. My kids, for example, they're 12 and 13. They're going to grow up their whole, into their adulthood. Their whole life will have been with the technologies we're working with now. Having said that, so they can command the tools of their time. I'm pretty confident. But the other part of this is that young people coming up also have been given that same old playbook that's been handed on from generations. And so this is causing a lot of problems because many of us are wired and ready to play in the new game, but we're doing it with the old playbook that we've been given. Others of us don't see the game has changed. And so we're still using the old playbook and also still trying to play in the old game. So there's a lot of confusion out there. And again, I would go back to my football player and I would say, how do you get into this new game? What's the playbook for that? How do we learn? We're inventing this new playbook. So you've made this point already. How do we do this collaboratively? How do we learn together? How do we build organizations now that can learn instead of sort of execute? It's all about the performance. Now we're in a learning environment. So performance is largely based on how well we learn.
It's very true. So to shift gears a little bit, mentorship is at the core of many of the activities that we do here at the center. So can you speak a bit about how mentorship has influenced you? And can you share a story about a mentor that helped you?
Well, I have my favorite mentor story is actually has to do with my kids. First of all, let me just say this. My life has been about collecting mentors because, as I told you before, I make these big shifts in my career. They're big, going from sort of a labor community organizer to being being the COO of a big, landmark presidential campaign and running an organization of 6,000 when I was running an organization of 5. These are very different dynamics for me. So I collect mentors, and the thing that's most important is most of my mentors don't know that they're mentors. So I'm just kind of learning and drawing into their space as much as I can. But also I've found the best mentor relationships are those when it's a two-way relationship, not one way. Because when I was younger, I had something and I think of this today, I try to surround myself with as many young mentors as I can, because they bring a perspective that I don't have anymore. and they also, young people, I also think of children in some ways, younger kids as mentors, because they're the future stakeholders of our world. And they have a perspective that's very different from mine as somebody who's sort of using the world in the moment. And so this kind of relationship, I think, is important. This perspective is important. When we were my kids were probably, I don't know, I'm going to give, it could have been 8 and 7, something like this. We were actually giving them a tour of a political campaign back in 2016, I guess. And there were some people who were mentoring our kids, showing them around, showing how the organization worked. A guy from the NFL across town had heard what we were doing and asked us to bring our kids over to him, and he'd show them how the NFL sort of works behind the scenes. And he's been a mentor and a champion of theirs ever since. And I never knew this guy. So this ability for people to bring their mentorship into any moment and really act on it. It's not like a planned thing. That can be the richest kind of relationship that you can have.
Yeah, and being a nonprofit that supports entrepreneurs, we collect mentors on the daily.
Absolutely.
Who care about giving back. So if you haven't already, sign up for Mentor Makers, y'all. It's free. And I was speaking to an entrepreneur on Wednesday about it. You pretty much have if you have availability, you have the unlimited capability to book as many meetings as you want. She said she booked too many and had to cancel a bunch because she didn't have time to take all the meetings.
But that's such a great outlook to be able to want to give yourself in that way, because really that is the Changemaker way. It's the team. It is that kind of thinking is a team of teams coming together. Right now, you and I are a team of teams, and the community around us is a team of teams in this moment. So we're in an engagement together right now.
Love that. So speaking of teams, I think, what does this Changemaker framework mean for us outside of the professional workplace? How couldn't we apply it to our daily lives?
Yeah, so I think that is the thing. I look at this also as a parent. My lens has changed even as a parent. I started looking at what were the experiences that young changemakers had. I was looking at like Florence Nightingale, Abraham Lincoln, Conrad Hilton, the hotelier. I looked at modern day changemakers like Michelle Obama and others that I've been working with over the last 7 years, everyday changemakers that are in the book that you don't know, but you'll never forget after you read them. And what I found is that empathy was very present in their childhood, particularly before age 7, particularly as it's modeled by key adults in their lives. And then in like 7 to 12, it's about having a passion and learning around that passion. So not just learning how to kick a soccer ball, but how to interview, how math comes into that, how to, marketing, all those things you can learn if you have that passion. And that's a model of learning that will serve you for life. And then teenagers, having a team that has an idea and puts a team around that idea and collaborates around that idea together as a community. These were and leaving your environment to learn, leaving your comfort zone. So I had this again in my early experience in high school when I went to Sweden, right? So but you can leave just your zip code. You don't have to leave the country. You can have these different experiences outside your comfort zone in many different ways. And what I found is that as a parent, if I want my kids to be in this changemaker game, I needed to build those into my life. Empathy with my kids, helping them learn around their passion. Now they're becoming teenagers. How do they get ideas and put teams around that and learn leadership in a team context, having leave to learn moments? So that's just one way I do this. But people are going to find that they're going to either make changes in their ways at work. Some of you will find ideas of how to contribute in your community. You might parent differently. You might teach differently after this, after our little session together. But, start slow. Just try different things. Understand how the world has changed. Understand that the new skills are empathy, co-creative teamwork, new leadership where everyone is a player, no one is passive, and putting your changemaker capacities to work for the good of everyone. And then as you start to follow that roadmap, I think you'll find that you'll innovate very differently from how I have.
It's sound advice from your experience. So Just a heads up, team, on this call, we're going to open up for live Q&A in a moment. So drop your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. But Henry, before we jump into that, what's one thing you want our audience to take away from our discussion today?
The game has changed. The game has changed. It's not a choice. We're in a new game. You got to get into this game. The new skills, the new capacities you need are empathy, co-creative teamwork, new leadership where everyone on the team is a contributor and no one can be passive, and putting your capacities to work for the good of all. And understand that our systems were built for the game of repetition. So that means your real work is changing those systems to accommodate all the change makers around you, whether that's at work, at school, in your community, whatever that looks like. How do we build systems, cultures, ways of working together so that we can accommodate everyone as a change maker and a full contributor and move humanity and our missions, our individual missions forward?
The game has changed. All right, well, we've got some questions coming in. If you've got any more questions around leadership or how to be a change maker, please drop them in the Q&A function. Bottom of your screen, we'll try to get to all of them. So Henry, to start us off, an attendee says, I really appreciate your story because my journey has had many twists and turns as well. With the democratization of leadership roles and change-making environments, how is accountability for missteps managed and measured?
Yeah, so, and in our case, in my laboratory, I'll go back to my laboratory again, we didn't become everyone the leader. You still had to lead from your place in that system. And so, but for me, what I found was leading by example, helping others around me understand the context for how we should lead, what goes out of bounds and what doesn't. I found there were very, very, very few instances where people went rogue. People do want to play and they want to be full contributors. They want to be in the game and not on the sidelines. And so, the real thing is, how do you change your leadership style to accommodate this? And for me, that's, I had different kinds of meetings. We often had check-ins where I almost didn't talk at all. And frankly, we had shorter check-ins where everyone gave a report on what they were doing. We had a standing meeting every day. We all just came together in a large huddle and reported on what was going on. And then the idea wasn't to debate it like you would in the old meeting. It was to say, go find that person after the meeting. You heard what they're doing, have a conversation, figure out how to do this together. And my leadership was about curating information. Remember that early morning staff meeting where we kind of gather and you'd report on the silo's activities and you take instruction back to the silo. In this new way of working, the morning meeting was about curating what's going on and then trying to stay apace with all the change that was going. So I think that's the key here, is to just moderate your new leadership and learn it. You are going to make mistakes. That's why you have to build a learning environment so that you don't make mistakes, costly mistakes, but also so that you can learn and manage the system together better. But I think that's the key, is softer falls and more communication.
Great. Question just came in that builds off that one a little bit. It says, with a more collaborative working, how do you maintain credibility / authority as the leader? Yeah,
so this is a tough one, right? And I people have their own environment, so I can only speak to kind of how I see it in my context personally, but also when I work with other organizations. The authoritative leader is way out of tune in this new way of working. And so one of the ways you lose your credibility is by sort of slamming that fist on the table and saying, do it my way. But you do have to still assert your leadership, and it's in different ways. So for me, it's a lot more through story. It's a lot more through understanding individuals in the organization instead of trying to give big group edicts. I do a lot more one-on-one work to understand where everybody's coming from. So I coach like I would in that football game. Like I said, it's not the quarterback anymore. Now I'm about each individual person on the team. How do they learn differently? How do they see things differently? This is a relationship game. And if I'm busy ticking boxes on lists somewhere and avoiding people, which is very easy to do as a manager, then probably I'm not going to, and frankly, what the job of the manager was a lot of in the old game, I'm not going to do very well. So how do I make myself more available? How do I make sure that we're bringing everyone along? That's an individual by individual basis, or with my leaders, my other leaders who are doing this, making sure that they're engaging in a way that is bringing everyone along. But I will tell you, this is tough. This is tough one. This is a tough one to learn and to really feel comfortable with. But now what we have are the best leaders are the ones who are collaborative and have an empathetic mindset in their leadership.
And would you say by empowering people and letting them be change makers themselves, that you gain that credibility and authority?
Absolutely.
Just by doing so?
Yeah, I think you're right. And and I even say empowering, like, why should we be empowered as change makers? We are change makers. Why don't you enable us, right? And so that's another way, by enabling, instead of me sort of letting you as the manager, now I'm going to let you be a change maker. Why don't I enable that through the systems and ways of working? I love that point, Colin. Really great.
Another question, and keep them coming, folks. These are great. I absolutely I absolutely see the shift that you've mentioned, and just ordered your book. Well, congratulations. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on what role purpose plays in the change paradigm.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of, suddenly now purpose is not cool. I'm starting to hear this thing about, oh yeah, it's about, purpose was something that's kind of come and gone. I just don't get that. Again, my kid, if you just look at change makers in history and you look at that period of 7 to 12, young people at that age really learn around that passion, around that purpose, the thing that they've discovered that really drives their curiosity. And I feel like that if we carry that forward and if we honor that, then we bring something really unique and authentic into any situation, and that by itself opens up new opportunities. So I am a very purpose-driven, not agenda-driven, because we have to live and work together. But I'm very much about purpose-driven leadership in everyone, and how do we moderate that together so that we build something really beautiful? Because when you have purpose, and my purpose changes, I guess I've always been about helping everyone step into their bigness. That's probably a through line in my career, but how that's kind of shown up has been very different in my career. But that is how I learn and grow. And so when we are learning and growing, we're in our best place. And when you are on a team that is learning and growing, man, bottle that, hold that, do whatever you can with that, because that's when really beautiful things happen. I say, make that bet on yourself and hold on to your purpose. You won't, I don't think you'll regret it.
I love that, purpose driven. And I think a lot of the entrepreneurs in our community are starting these organizations because they're trying to follow their passions.
Absolutely.
And support their purpose.
Right. And what's better for a community that when you start something and you see a need in the community and you build something and you put a team around it and you formalize that with an organization and you're all working together towards something you feel passionate about, knowing that people are going to move on to follow their passions into new directions. I worked for this really great organization, Ashoka. I thought I couldn't have a better job after the White House. I loved it. But, I went on to work with this organization called Ashoka, which was really thinking differently about social entrepreneurship in the world, how people can show up. My passion, I was living the dream there as well. But you know what? After 7 years, I wanted to take that into new directions. And so it's okay when we have people who are following their passion away. And hopefully they're bringing their really great experiences forward in very different ways. I mean, when the Beatles broke up, we had 4 great artists now making records, not just one group. So it's, there's some really great things when you can move your legacy forward, your last legacy forward. I think that we should think a lot more about how to reposition our leadership so we're following our purpose all the time.
Yeah, and I love that you made the reference to music and the evolution of it, because often entrepreneurs have a little bit of trouble hearing is that the product will definitely 100% change from where it is from today. Right? This is not version 1,
Yes.
and it still updates every year. But what
Great
doesn't,
point.
what investors or customers or employees hope doesn't change much, is the passion that the entrepreneur has for solving the problem that they're aiming to solve, right?
Absolutely. And, that's when you really are on. Sometimes the social entrepreneur, the entrepreneur has to, that repositioning piece can be painful, because sometimes to go to the next level, you have to break up with what you're known for. And sometimes you have to break up with your revenue model to go to the next level. And so those are 2 hard things to break up with. So it's always thinking about, how you can reposition your leadership around your passion. That can be within the organization still, and you still have to maybe make some changes that are just as dramatic as what I just said. It also might mean that you have to reposition your leadership. Take that map out, look at that trail. You might have to veer to the right instead of the path that you were on.
Totally. And I spoke to a founder this week who, this may not be the right approach for everybody, so don't take my advice here, but he says it's what works well for his organization is having a rotating CEO model.
Oh, right.
So every year somebody else takes the chair.
Well, that's a breakup. So that's an interesting, right, how you do these, right? These ideas are principles, not tactical, right? How this plays out in any kind of situation is going to be unique to your situation. So any leader has to figure this out in their own context, but the principles are still the same. Same on the campaign trail. Define thyself lest you be defined. Show me a candidate who can't define themselves, and I'll show you one who's going to lose. They'll be defined. And so even in the space of our own lives, how we are defined matters. How our organization functions and is viewed, is framed, matters. So how you constantly have to be positioning yourself against that frame all the time.
That's great advice. Yeah. So to the entrepreneurs out there, define yourself before you let others define you.
Absolutely. That is a change maker rule number 1. That's the true north on the compass.
Amazing. Well, Henry, I wish we had more time, but we are almost at 1 p.m. Pacific. So thank you so much for taking the time today to speak to our community, share some of your insights from your book, The Changemaker Playbook, and just set such a great overview for the entrepreneurs that are attending today and online. On behalf of everyone at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center and our team, we thank you. And for everyone who is still on the call, we've got some great stuff coming up. So tomorrow we've got storytelling with Donna, and on Thursday we've got Mentor Makers Live with the U.S. Air Force and Vets in Tech. So thank you again, Henry, for joining us, and thank you all for joining us online. We look forward to seeing you back online soon. Till next time. Thanks again, Henry, and everyone for joining.
Thank you, everyone.